Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Knives Out, starring Daniel Craig, Chris Evans, Anna de Armas, Jamie Lee Curtis, Michael Shannon, Don Johnson, Tony Collette, Lakeith Stanfield, Catherine Langford, and Jaden Mortel, directed by Ryan Johnson. Now, before I get into this movie, I did go to theaters for this on Thanksgiving Day with my mother, and I have some theories about it, but I'll get to that in a couple of minutes and I'm not going to go back to Star Wars The Last Jedi because I did that back in 2017. If you want to see how I feel about that, go to the 2017 era around Christmas of that's when I reviewed The Last Jedi. So, and people had their knives out for this director, Ryan Johnson, and that's why I'm covering his oeuvre today. Let's see how this movie goes. Let's just talk about what I have as a theory going into this review. The movie begins with the morning after the death of Harlan Thrombey, played by Christopher Plummer, as witnessed by a housekeeper named Fran, while 1 week after his death, a caretaker named Marta Cabrera, played by Anna de Armas, is asked at the house by one of his children, Walt, played by Michael Shannon, as she arrives and sees Meg, played by Catherine Langford, and enters to see Linda Drysdale, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, and her husband Richard, played by Don Johnson. And we move on to the questioning with Lieutenant Elliot, played by Lakeith Stanfield, along with Benoit Blanc, played by Daniel Craig, with this hard accent. As the questions are about what happened at the night of the birthday party of Harlan, and while we're hearing about the answers, we hear about Jacob, who's a part of the family, but feels like he's in the background while interviewing Joni, played by Tony Collette, as this is a whodunit with a game of Clue, and the characters are interesting to watch on screen. Even Daniel Craig pulls that accent like I can't understand a damn thing he says. But he is very good in this movie, don't get me wrong, at all. And the introduction of these characters are great, but one character I immediately knew it was when I first saw this particular person when seeing the movie for the first time in theaters by Thanksgiving. But I'll hang on to that when I get to this. But again, this is a great game of Clue. Walt brings up the person whom I just said a minute ago, who on my money was on that did the murder. And spoiler alert, I'm going to just say it now. When I first saw this movie on Thanksgiving Day with my mother, I immediately thought Linda and Richard's son Ransom, played by Chris Evans, was the one who wanted Harlan dead for reasons I'll get into later, as he had an argument with Harlan and he's the biggest asshole in this entire movie. Please excuse my French. As Harlan is a rich man, while Richard is trying to get out of an affair with a woman whom we don't know anything about, while Joni wants money for his daughter's school. Walt wants to write more books, but Harlan fires him from the business as he's the boss of that family business, which makes perfect sense for a game of Clue. Blanc begins an interview with Marta, and she seems nervous, and I have a huge crush on Anna de Armas after this movie, that she was great for what she did briefly in Daniel Craig's last James Bond film, No Time to Die. While Blanc and I figure out how she might be lying, because when he asked Richard's affair that Harlan asked her about earlier, she vomits so, and when he figures it out at the end of the movie by pointing it out the shoe that had blood on it, which made perfect sense, and this movie works tremendously as a whodunit genre. Marta goes with Harlan to play a game as she gives him his medicine by a needle, which always scared the crap out of me, sure, as she realizes she gave him the wrong medicine by accident, as she freaks out and wants to get him still alive, as he'll die in the next 10 minutes, which is a smart idea, as this is a very smart script. As she wants to call the ambulance, but he knows he won't be alive much longer, and he wants her to escape by the outside window, one level down, as the house has 3 levels, while she goes downstairs, and to be avoided by security cameras without making a sound, which is again a very smart move. And this is a very smart movie. The family talks politics and going on about what Trump is thinking as far as people coming into America legally versus illegally, which I hate talking about while reviewing a movie, so I'm just going to skip over that. While they hear Ransom yelling at Harlan walking out of the house, while Marta is scared and smokes briefly with Meg and is offered by Walt and Meg to help her and her family out. As I like the way that sounds, but at the end, they seem like bad people in their own way. But I like them surprisingly. I'll say that much. The next day comes to at the household, and Blanc, with Marta by his side, watch some security camera footage. And as the tape fries, and when the family arrives at the house, a couple of dogs greet them while Marta stays around for the reading for the will. And I'm enjoying these scenes as they're well acted. Ransom arrives, and everyone is not happy with his arrival, and Richard and Walt almost fight each other while telling Ransom off, and Ransom tells everyone to eat shit until Block and Marta go outside and figures out a clue from a blocked window. Yeah, blocked window. And Blanc sees dry mud, and we move on to the reading of the will with Alan Stevens, played by Frank Oz, aka Yoda, after voicing Yoda briefly in The Last Jedi, as we learn about Harlan giving every dime in the house everything to Marta while Ransom laughs his head off and leaves while laughing, and Marta takes off and tries to escape, and as she tries, Ransom takes her away from the family and takes her to a restaurant as they talk and wants her to tell him what happened to his grandfather. And I believe the audience are supposed to hate Ransom, and Chris Evans does a great job at making him a very unlikable character. And I do like how he can play evil as he pulls it off great. Ransom wants to help Marta get away with the will as he wants his take of the will, and Meg calls her and tells her to give the will back to the family as they hear the conversation, which is very sneaky of her. Marta is woken up by her sister while she is brought up on the TV about taking over Harlan's household, while Blanc talks with Mrs. Thornby about her son's murder, as she might have saw something, and Walt comes by the Cabrera house and asks, about his father's will, and she feels uncomfortable, and she gets a note that says, "I know what you did," and she's frightened, and shows it to Ransom, and she's afraid to tell her family that's believable, and this is great acting by Ana de Armas. Marta and Ransom drive by a place that was burned up, and she gets an address of where to meet at 10 a.m. by email and gets caught by Blanc, and he with the cops go after them and are surrounded and take Ransom back to the house while Blanc wants to get Marta to the police station and goes to the address the email says and finds Fran injured by a drug but not quite dead as Marta gets her to the hospital while Blanc doesn't realize he hears sirens until they get closer, which was hilarious. While the rest of the scenes are making much more sense, Blanc wants to take Marta to the house because she wants to confess to the family about how she didn't know that the will was going to happen the way it did, as she wants to keep the house, and Blanc tells them off and takes Marta to another room while one of the detectives brings Ransom in the room, and Blanc explains what happened to Harlan, as Ransom switched the drugs while Fran gets Ransom as he blackmailed Marta, and she ended up giving Harlan the right drug after all, while Ransom confesses he did it in the first place, and the hospital calls Marta about Fran being alive, but Marta vomits on Ransom's face because she lied about Fran as she's dead. And they recorded it, and he suddenly tries to kill her with a knife, but the knife wasn't real, and the way Chris Evans reacted and says, "Shit," which was hilarious. So Ransom is arrested while Blanc tells her how he knew she was lying to begin with, and Martha decides to keep the house and stares the family down from the balcony, and this is a very fun climax as this is a fun game of Clue. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 8.7 out of 10. This is one of the best whodunit movies I've ever seen in a while, as it's a great game of Clue, and the performances are great. As Daniel Craig had that accent that I just couldn't understand a damn thing he was saying, as I immediately knew based on the character that Ransom was the one who wanted Harlan dead from the beginning of the movie. Anna de Armas is great in this movie, as I have a crush on her now after watching this movie, and I'll probably watch Blonde with her as Marilyn Monroe after watching her in this movie, as well as No Time to Die and Blade Runner 2049, as this is a smart idea for a smart movie, and kudos to director Rian Johnson for making his comeback after Star Wars The Last Jedi, which is an excellent choice. The movie is a great whodunit mystery thriller that has some funny moments in it. And at the end of the day, I'm looking forward to seeing what's coming up next in the mystery of Benoit Blanc. And this is a strong recommendation. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me. And next time we'll be back with Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery. And until then, the case has been solved.